to the historical fencing channel. Um, I'm here. This is My name is James Riley from the Goliath Historical Fencing Academy in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and I'm joined here by my good friend Milos.
Yes,
Milos, would you introduce yourself and share a little
sure.
bit about your fencing and sort of what you're doing with historical fencing?
Yeah, so my name is Milos. We're here in Champaign-Urbana in Illinois. We just started a new club separating from our old club that was HEMA UC that was tied to the university, and now we're tempered metal historical fencing. And my teacher and lead instructor is Matt Curry. Sure, a lot of people know him by name. He's definitely more active in tournaments and everything than I am. So yeah,
Great,
been
yeah.
fencing several years now, almost coming up to that point.
So I've known you. I've known you for several years now. At this point, it must be I must know you for 4 or 5 years. Yeah,
Yep.
right.
The
Yeah.
thing,
So
first time we met was in Iowa. It was the you were doing the
International Metal
staff.
Symposium. All right.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that would have been 2019,
something like that.
potentially
2018,
2019.
2019.
Yeah. 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 And so yeah, we're here because I've done quite a bit of uh, film study, right? Tape video,
hmm
tape review. Uh, tape review is kind of is an anachronism, but we stick with it. Um, it's a digital review, digital video review of fencing and talking people through their fencing bouts and things like that. And I've been doing this for a long time, but so we looked at your a video of a bout that you had a few days ago, or maybe week or so ago,
It was about two
um,
weeks ago. Yeah.
2 weeks ago, but just recently published. And thought it
hmm
would be I thought it was an excellent video, and it would be a really useful tool for analysis uh, for all of us, right? So for you and I to sit here and discuss things that happen, but also just in general for sort of for other people who aren't used to this type of experience, like really
hmm
detailed criticism of fencing actions and choices and behaviors and strategies and things like that, to get to see what that looks like, right? Um, and so we're going to take a look at your video. One of the reasons that I thought it was so thought it would be such an excellent tool is there's a few things that you did that I thought were really well executed and the correct
hmm
tactical choice and um, physically, executed very competently. And then there's also a few things that we can we can look at and we can say
hmm
maybe this is an area in your fencing or in your practice that you could spend some time developing. Right. So what we'll do is we'll um, we'll start the video and then we'll do some pauses and then maybe we may slow it down
hmm
um, to look at like very deliberate timing throughout the actions and things like that. But before we do, why don't you set the stage the stage for us in terms of what the context of this fencing bout was?
Okay, so I don't exactly remember what we were doing that day. The way our club works is we'll go over a lesson. Lesson can be as simple as doing a shtuk, breaking it down, and then practicing it as
Well,
much
so
as we
you say
can.
Stook, so we should be clear about the this is a HEMA practice,
This is a
and
HEMA
so
practice, yeah.
yeah. So what do you mean when you say Stook?
So Myers primarily will do the art of combat.
Right,
Myers,
gotcha.
and so obviously we're primarily still focusing on longsword. We
Yeah.
do sec. I have a couple behind me, but
Oh
mostly
yeah, you have
we'll
those
do.
are.
Mhm.
You have antique swords behind you as well, or are
No,
those just
those are
thing?
all different manufacturers,
Gotcha,
Regeniers, Albions,
gotcha.
other stuff. But yeah, and so. after after we go through the lesson, everybody is bored with learning new things. We start doing like friendly bouts, basically.
Yeah.
They're often not really structured. So we're coming from practicing in an arena, which is basically a stock pavilion. It's for animals. It's huge space. We don't have a 10 by 10 ring to go from corner to corner. So our fencing tends to circle around, to move around. We do have a lot of movement on moving in and out of distance. Primarily, our idea is most effectual rules. We try to hit the
Mhm.
head. We still call out hand hits and body hits, but again, our main thing is trying to get sword, head, sword primarily.
And edge specifically, right? So we're
Yep.
not looking for points. We're not
Mhm.
looking for the point of the sword to make contact necessarily
Correct.
with the
Correct.
opponent. So for people who are interested in the effectual rules, the man to talk to would be Chris Van Slambrook or Roger
Yes.
Norling or Kevin Maurer, who have done
Hmm.
extensive research on what those effectuals look like and what the
Hmm.
rules that were used. And so there's been an effort here in the Midwest of the United States to develop fencing sort of predicated on those ideas. And
Hmm.
yeah, great. So let's talk a little bit about the pace of the bout because another aspect of this these exchanges that drew my eye was the pace of the bout. It was very easygoing pace and very interested in sort of um, very controlled placement of of the swords, kind of at all times,
Hmm.
right? And I think so is that something that you guys uh, uh, sort of encourage as a club, or
Yes.
tell me more
Yeah,
about that?
we encourage that control and taking, getting a strong position before swinging wildly, right?
Yeah, right. Okay.
So if we do, it kind of sort of develops into a dynamic, and so we'll, yeah. At this point, I don't really think either of us think so much about the pacing. It is more like
Mm,
a flow at this point because we've done
yeah,
quite a few like that.
right, right, right. So one thing that I would say, and I very much encourage all of this, like the sort of trying to slow down the action and use the theoretically proper action in the correct space of time. I
Hmm.
think as a general rule is a very useful tool towards developing sensitivity to to those stimuli, right? So maybe in another context when people are moving a lot faster, um, uh, you might not be able to work. You're limited in terms of how slow you can work. You have to work inside your opponent's action, and so if
Yeah.
your opponent is moving very fast, then you have to move very fast.
Hmm.
But that being said, if we in general we keep out our own training slow and sort of methodical, then it helps us be able to see those actions more clearly so that later when we're fencing people who are moving much faster, we're familiar with the stimuli. We've already developed a sensitivity and we've already trained our body to
Hmm.
respond the way that we'd like it to in that slower pace. And so we can eventually end up moving faster and performing
Hmm.
the correct action, right?
Correct.
For that reason, I want to really suggest that this would be a really um, I would encourage everyone to adopt this sort of pacing um, in their own practice, regardless of what their context, their preferred context for training historical
Hmm.
fencing is. So let's go ahead and we'll open up the video and
Let's do.
well, we'll get into we'll stop it and slow it down as things go, and I'll just give you
Mhm.
my thoughts on things that are happening as they happen. So here we go.
Sure thing.
Okay, is that coming through there? Beautiful. All right, here we go. So let's start it.
It only works if you got big ass hands, though.
Can you hear the audio by any chance?
I did hear the audio. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. I can't hear the audio, so
Okay.
So that's all right. I have what I need. So here we go. So let's
Yeah,
launch it
it only
here.
works if you got big ass hands, though.
I like that there's a little bit of measurement of distance, right? And there's a feeling around for a strong position. So both of you start with your swords sort of, withdrawn, so not present. No, the point
Hmm.
isn't forward. The swords are withdrawn at a safe distance, right? And then as soon as that distance sort of closes to where all of a sudden you guys are encroaching hitter range, your swords come forward. So I think that's a useful idea. Often what happens is we spend too much time with our swords withdrawn, and then gradually getting closer and closer into range with our swords withdrawn to almost to bait out an attack. And I think just as a general rule, knowing that once we're too close, if our sword isn't there, then there's nothing there to defend us, right? So
Yeah.
I thought that was excellent. Um, you're just seeking a strong position, right? That's where your
Correct.
mentality is here?
Yes.
Yeah. So so it looks like you attain a strong position. We'll slow it down for a second here.
Hmm.
Playback speed. So he withdraws. You withdraw. So
Yeah. And there's a
he
little bit
he
of
with
like fishing for his sword, like
yeah.
trying to get that bind.
And here we have, so right there we
Hmm.
have a strong bind on your part, and I think that's excellent. And you've already sort of committed this foot without committing your body.
Hmm.
So what's nice about this, what's as you can see how your left foot is forward just as you
Hmm.
achieve that strong bind. What's nice about this is that you now are loaded with the weight on your left foot for a potential thrust um, to the face, right? So if it was Lichtenauer, I'd be telling you to thrust to the face, or you
Hmm.
could also absetzen a la Joachim Meyer, who would tell you to basically take that position and then strike a cut with a short edge
Hmm.
to the top of the head. Right? So that's what I would be thinking here. Like the moment that you've achieved that bind, my my next primary course of action, if he did nothing, which we generally don't expect our opponents to do nothing, but if they do, we should have a plan for that. And so here I would Obsessin um, a la Meyer with a short edge cut to the top of my opponent's head. So we'll continue. Um, and he raises his sword. He raises his sword high here. So tell me
Hmm.
what you're thinking in this moment.
Oh, I'm kind of what I'm thinking is targeting because he's raising his hands. I can either shoot for the hands, which is again not our preferred action, at least in the club, because we want either a head hit or a body hit, not so much hand hits. But you could, I could
Right.
be aiming for that. I think that is what I go for almost
Mhm.
instinctively, because my brain was already primed targeting his head. But I
Yeah.
also watch for that lower opening and trying to do a quick Unterhau into like basically targeting for his chin, most
Yeah.
often hitting like the elbow.
Right, and so that is in Meyer, yeah. So we do see
Hmm.
Unterhaus to the chin, particularly when we have
Hmm.
blade configurations like this. So if this were some of the earlier sources, then we would expect a thrust to the belly, right? So we would take the strong position that we have on the raised sword, move our physical strong to their physical weak, turn our
Hmm.
shorten our posture, turn our point into their belly, and then step with the right foot in the direction of that thrust. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I think I
So
know what
that's
you're
how
referring to.
that's how I would approach this. But if I'm fencing the fictional rules, then a Unterhau, lifting the blade off of or lifting my blade off of his, and then cutting a long edge Unterhau up underneath the chin would be appropriate. Another action that can be appropriate from here would just be a slice to the head. So it wouldn't be a percussive cut,
Hmm.
but rather we would use if the chin wasn't available as a target, I could I could press on his head, basically take a strong position on his arms, and then move with my right foot, step outside, and then pivot around to press his hands down, giving me my opening my target to the head. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah. So you're meaning getting a slice under, stepping and
Yeah,
pressing the hands
getting
to open.
exactly. Yeah, getting a slice under, uh, on basically stepping with my right to my right, his left,
Mm-hmm.
and then pivoting around with the back foot. So taking my left in a counterclockwise motion, pressing down with the hand. So let's see what you do here. Uh,
Let's
let's
see.
see. Okay, so yeah, you missed an opportunity for a target there. That's okay. Things are moving pretty fast, but that's there. He offers you that opening several times, and there were moments where you took it immediately,
Hmm.
and moments where you're a little hesitant. In that case, so you're a little hesitant. It's no big deal. So let's continue. And strong bind again. Oh, I love this. This is actually that's the action that uh, compelled me to
Hmm.
suggest this video as a potential live stream.
Okay.
Uh, so just a beautiful strong parry with the short edge of the sword or the zook in action,
Hmm.
uh, covering the outside line. Basically bringing the strong to the line of the shoulder, just enough, and then from there we can deliver a long edge cut to the head. Um, if if it were me, I might do something just a hair differently once I got to that parry. So we'll stop. We'll get the parry. He goes to strengthen. You disrespect him. Oh no, he cuts around us. So now we're here. So in this moment, I would, I might potentially plunge cut. Does that
Okay.
make sense? So I would cut. So I would cross my arms, keeping my short edge, bringing my short edge forward in the crossing, and then come down with either it could be a thrust or a short edge cut to the head. Does that make sense?
Yes. So basically, you're collecting his sword on on your long edge and coming
Yeah.
in with the short edge.
Well, yeah, that's right. So I would say I've parried. I've made my parry with the short edge, and then I'm turning my long edge into his blade as I
Mhm.
as I bring my point forward, right? Because right now the point is behind you, but you have a strong position. So you'd cross your arms, bringing the point forward, and then you could make contact with the top of his head with the short edge. And what that does, what I like about that type of action, is as he makes his subsequent parry, right? So as he brings his sword back across the line
Mhm.
with this short edge cut, you're primed for the Umschlagen to the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I do both of these quite often. It's really just a question of how close I am to my target and how fast either of those actions are, whether or not I have enough time to beat the parry. It seems like his parry just pushes your sword aside. So if you were able to go short edge, long edge there,
Hmm.
you might have had a follow up Umschlagen to his left side. You see what I mean there? Does that make sense?
You think so? Yeah.
So again, if we're here, we draw his sword out, cuts around, and now short edge, and then as he parries, long edge cut to the head on the other side would have been
Hmm.
possible.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see
All
how that
right.
would set you up for that hit to his left side of the head.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Give me 1 second. I just want to
Yeah.
make sure that my computer doesn't die on me as
Sure
I do
thing.
this. Good. Yeah. So uh, so you'll find that kind of thing happens an awful lot in the sources, especially in Meyer's rapier. He uses that type of action, the sort of binding on with a long edge, so that we can direct our thrust in, so that as they parry, we can come around with the Umschlag. If that makes sense.
Hmm.
Uh, so, in fact, actually, we'll take a moment. I'm going to show you because I made some videos for you um, for this. Actually, no, we can continue this for a moment, and then
Okay.
we'll get to those videos. All right. Keeping the point free. I love this. This is good fencing. Strong overbind. He withdraws his sword. Ah, so right here, let's talk about action. So this is, in terms of actions that, I've been praising your fencing up until this moment, but this one, I think we should take a harder look at. Right? So here you have strong bind.
Yeah, so that's again that fishing for the bind.
Yeah. Okay, so you're strong on the inside.
There we go.
Yeah, good. Now he comes over. Now, in this moment, you begin to raise your hands. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I would admonish that type of action in this particular configuration. Right? You're lucky that it works out okay for you in this case because he doesn't target the middle of your blade with his subsequent bind. But as you raise your hands and you keep your point forward, you end up breaking the structure of your sword. So the point of the sword leaves the center of your body.
Mm-hmm.
And so if he were to come down on the middle of the blade in that moment, then he could crush it and then set himself up with a stronger bind that he could then work to his advantage.
Yeah.
So, well, does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah, because it has happened. Like, and I should know that. I should know because like my sword ends up being like halfway, and I'm completely bound up, and then I just got twacked in the head.
Right. So what I'm going to do now, I will show you a video that I made, just
Okay.
a way that you can approach that particular bind, um, and work to an advantage. Um, so here's so so this is a video that I made yesterday in preparation for this, and let me see if I can't slow the action down to 25%. So here we have my opponent. So I just set the strong bind up here. Do you see how my hand and my point are all in line against his blade?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So my
Yep.
point here, my hands, and the center of my chest are all in a straight line.
Okay.
And so instead of raising my hands, I'm able to just extend my thrust forward. So you can see how that happens
Mm-hmm.
there. Does that make sense?
Okay. And to be clear, you're orienting toward his weak, towards his sword, with your sword in your hands.
Yeah. So I'm looking to bind. I'm looking to bind on the middle of his blade, for in a strong enough position for long enough to get my physical strong towards his weak. Right. So I'm always pointing in the direction that my sword is moving in these instances.
Mm-hmm.
If I point in an opposite direction of the way my sword is moving, then my opponent has the potential of binding on my middle and collapsing my structure.
Gotcha.
Right. So you can imagine if once I'm here. So once I'm, if we look, of course he's withdrawn now. So you can see how my swords, right now our swords are bound middle on middle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so if I lifted my hilt without taking my point offline, then all he would have to do is put a little bit of pressure on my middle and he would collapse it.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm looking to do with this geometry, with the strong geometry, if he were to press against my middle now, under these circumstances, what would happen to his sword?
So it goes to the cross.
It would go to my cross, exactly, right? And then once that happens, then he's done my work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in this case, he's not doing that because he knows better. So I have to take an extra step, which is to move my cross in the direction of his weak, without sacrificing the structure of my point. So I do that here, and then I'm able to hit with the short edge. I can keep the point across towards his sword the whole action, and then just as my strong reaches just as my strong reaches sort of his weak, I'm able to turn my point in. Do you see
Hmm.
how I do that?
Yeah.
So that's the way that I'm looking to perform that action.
Okay.
All right. So we'll go back now. Uh, all right. Yeah. Now it worked out okay for you because he didn't cut onto your middle. He cut onto your strong, which was, you know, basically gave you that moment back.
Hmm.
Then he lifted, and then you do a nice cut to the arms or the chin in this case, right? So I love the way that you read that. His arms are coming high.
Hmm.
Uh, he left an opening to the mask, and you worked very nicely. You worked indes his action, and you targeted the opening as it presented itself. So that was excellent. Um,
I think he might have made a contact with my glove there.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I don't know how you guys feel about those types of incidental contacts, but for me, like, it seemed that you were clearly being very deliberate about your blade placement.
Hmm.
So again, beautiful, strong bind. Did you get the short edge cut to the head in this case?
So this was a little bit funny. So if you look, the sword was completely bound up. The way I
Okay.
have is I have this thing, and it has the S-shaped quillen.
Oh yeah, yeah, I see. Yeah.
His sword was completely bound in there, and so there was a lot of springiness and thing, and the both swords are moving in the same sort of direction. And I think I
Hmm.
completely took my eyes off of him and focused on the fact that, oh, his sword is completely bent and tied up into my
Uh-huh.
sword. So we went just all the way around until it frees, and then when it frees, then I cut in.
Right. Yeah. So what I would say here is this would be an example of what I would regard as Myers Absetsen, right? So what he's doing here is he's just basically binding strong on the opponent's sword. The opponent weakens in this case, um, and so we would normally hit with a Mucherin. In this case, we just hit with an Absetsen or a short edge cut to his head. Uh, so I think that's
Yeah, so they're
uh,
like,
yeah, I see how it's bound. But right there, that moment, I wasn't sure if you actually did make blade
mhm.
contact.
I
But
don't,
he,
yeah, I don't think
go
so.
ahead.
I don't think
Okay,
so. I think we were focused on the swords bound up.
gotcha. So we'll continue this, and then here uh, we free the sword, and then you have a nice
Yeah.
cut. So that's well done. Um, Initially, I was going to suggest that maybe you could have worked a little bit more indes in terms of the cut around. So once he was able to get his strong in front of your sword, in between your sword and his head, um, and then start to move it, I would have immediately tried to cut around there. But
Hmm.
knowing now that his sword was actually caught in such a way that you couldn't free it, I can see why maybe you didn't, why that might
Yeah.
not have been index. But I made another video we'll take a look at real quick of just a way that we can think about working indes with that action. So so can you see this now?
Yeah.
So here, so this is my assistant instructor helping me demonstrate. Okay,
Hmm.
so as soon as the strong goes high, we're immediately kind of coming off and following the direction of that motion. So, does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Hmm.
Yeah. But again, of course, uh, my point is very much free. His point wasn't, and so it's just a tool for
Hmm.
learning, not necessarily a criticism of your choice in that moment.
Beyond the like feeling, the bind, is it the visual cue? Is it when he's strong is moving up to move and cut around?
Yeah, so typically yes. So if his strong is in the way, if his strong is in the way of of your sword and his head, right? So if his
Mhm.
strong is situated between them, you have to figure out what the line of attack is, right? So um, we've already looked at one instance of the the strong is in the way, but the point is this way, yeah.
Mhm.
And so if if he can get his point across, then I'm looking to umschlagen around, right?
Okay.
Um, if his weak is if he's still bound, his strong is in the way of that point, but his weak is still in this direction. Then we do what you did before, which is cut either a slice to the hands or a cut to the chin. And I have a few videos here to demonstrate those exact things. So if I'm uh, if we look here, and then let me slow it down. So here we have I'm set up for Mutirin. So he's weak in this moment, but his strong is now in the way of my blade in his head. You can see that?
Mhm.
Yeah. So my next course of action should be one of two things. What should they be?
Well, either slice to the hands or cut under.
That's right. Yeah. So in this case, let's see what I do. I cut to the hands, and now here's the slice. I push the hands out of the way, and then that opens me up for a long edge cut to the head. Let me see
Yeah.
that one more time. So here I go for Mutirin. He raises his hilt. He keeps his point strong. Push the hands down and out, and then long edge cut to the head.
I
Okay.
see. Mhm.
So the alternative then uh, is if he gives me the opening under the chin. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we have the same situation here. And slow it down. Same action. Strong Mutirin. Closing distance. He raises his hilt. He gives me the opening under the chin, and I hit.
Yeah.
Then does that make sense?
That looks gorgeous.
Well, so the idea is to always try and move. One thing about working indes is we like to endeavor to move across space at the same rate as our opponent is moving across space.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we rely on the fact that we have less distance to travel because we're choosing the correct action. Right. So we have less distance to travel because we're choosing the correct action. So if we move across space at the same rate, then my action should come to completion first. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I never move faster than my opponent because I'm trying to carefully put my action where in the space of time it belongs. Also, if I move faster than my opponent, I lose sensitivity. So I lose fueling, uh, and I'm no
Mhm.
longer able to respond to sudden changes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll watch that one more time and see. So he raises his hands, and the moment, right, I take the
Mhm.
chin. And we've already seen how to umschlagen. So the other one that we looked at was this idea of umschlagening if his strong is crossing the center, right? So uh, we can look at the action again, Bob's action. The strong is crossing the center, and the point is also crossing the center, right? So I'm
Yeah.
not giving him the mutirin or the absetzen or the hand slice or the cut underneath the chin uh, because I'm pushing his point out of the way. And so
Mhm.
he works smoothly within my action, and that's the umschlag. We'll look at that a few more times. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. All right, so let's continue now with our. This next exchange, I believe, is um, another thing. You do another thing here that I thought was just beautifully done, biomechanically very sound, and tactically very appropriate. Okay, speed it up here.
Mhm.
here. Beautiful.
Mhm.
Uh, really like the way that you immediately take off. You see that his hilt is coming high. You
Mhm.
see that that your point is free, and then you do this beautiful crossed arms Unterhal, and it's and perfectly timed. Right. So talking about moving at the same rate. Yeah. Just
Mhm.
very very nice. You find yourself in that situation again. So again, I would say uh, we would look to the videos that we've already seen. There's quite a few opportunities for that opening because your opponent leaves his point to his right side quite often. And so those three hitters that I showed you videos of
Yeah.
me doing, those are going to be your bread and butter for an opponent who behaves that way. Right? But that just that initial binding on,
Mhm.
and then followed by an unter to the other side, very Meyer-esque, perfectly
Mhm.
done physically. So very nice. The Schlussel.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm actually. I have no idea what happened there. Where's the
It
hitter?
was That was part where it was a little bit messy. I think I started off with one idea, changed my mind halfway through.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And that was yeah.
Something that might be worth mentioning about that is that
Mhm.
what when by the time you're into what I call it the middle, or Meyer calls it the middle. Sometimes I
Mhm.
call it the Krieg, or the handworks section, right? The handworks area. You should really just limit yourself to working indes and doing the correct action, right? So the plan, the sort of like the broad idea, this is how I'm going to enter, is where the tactical strategic plans are formulated and are executed. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Mhm.
And then once you break into that middle range or that handworks range, then you basically have to do the right thing. Whatever the right thing is, you just have to figure out what that is and do and execute it.
Mhm.
And then sometimes that I don't know what the right thing is, and so I'm just going to attempt to strengthen as I withdraw, right? Uh,
Mhm.
you know, but that might be just my advice in those moments. Um, so we'll
Yeah.
continue. So what I love most about this is
Mhm.
uh, your opponent does not commit the requisite distance. You're in a withdrawn posture. Your sword is up on your shoulder. The opponent is sort of teasing you. He's saying, "Hey, come get my sword. Here it is." But you've recognized the distance and you realize there's no threat there, and so you're unfazed, right? And that not enough could be said about just that ability to recognize what the variables are and just respond accordingly. So it's very nice. Good not being stated there. What are your thoughts? You seem like you're ready to say something.
No, there's a cat in my lap here, so I'm just
Oh, I see.
extending. Yeah. No, that's exactly that. Like we're not in, but this time, the second time when he comes in, I think
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah. So now,
threatened.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
So again, we find ourselves in the same situation that we have been in.
Yeah.
So you were right to be threatened, right? So just
Mhm.
when we move from the Sufechten into the middle or the handworks or the Krieg, when we move from that distance, we need to be strong. We need to have been strong by the time the opponent completes their action in
Yeah.
order for us to have the advantage, right?
Mhm.
So if we're late on that, if you were bringing your sword down and covering the low left opening
Mhm.
as he brought his sword in, then this strike around would have actually been a threat to you. But it wasn't because you recognized that his second action was in fact close enough to be
Mhm.
a threat, and so
Yeah. I think.
you begin to cover the distance,
Mhm.
and this way you've already taken, and now you're just retaking on the other side.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I I think he did touch me on that umschlagen to
Okay.
the other side because it did
Uh,
think overcommit
Interesting. So
just slightly.
yeah. So I mean, he's bound on your cross. My just the way that I treat those is that if his blade touches my cross, then I don't regard that contact very much, because as soon as it hits steel, as long as there's structure involved, which in this case there's clearly structure, as soon as steel hits steel, that's it. The momentum is done, and so that's fine. What I would say is, though, I would look for a short edge cut here, sort of that minor abscess with a plunge cut, right? And then if he parries a second time, then umschlagen it again with his parry. So let's look at that some more. What do you do here? And see, this is again why. This is why, right? So this time you see the benefit of that, the plunge cut from here, because as he raises his hilt in that moment, you would already potentially be striking an Unterhau to his chin, with the follow-on strike, right? So if we're here, you retake. So you're strong here. Now, if you cross your arms, turn your short edge towards his head, he would still parry the exact same way. You may potentially hit with the thrust, or the short edge cut to the head. But then if he does get his hands up in time, then you could already hit with an Unterhau, right? But because you tried to strike with the long edge, your momentum is totally mitigated. Yeah?
I gotcha. I gotcha. Yeah, that actually does make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So all I would say is, in those cases, and this is why the master spends so much time talking about, like, turn your long edge in towards that bind, right? So in the initial cover, it's safe to parry with the short edge just to get the cross in front of the action, right? But then as we enter in with this crossed arms so that we're hitting with the short edge, and then we're bringing it around or bringing it under if they yeah. Good. All right. This is fine. So here we go. So there's a moment where you attempt to take, sort of with this striken action, and it doesn't work out for you. Yeah.
Nope. Yeah.
So you look to strike it, and then you're here, and he buries your action. So now you're bound. You're in a weak position, and you're in measure. Yeah.
Yep.
Does that make sense? So the way that I'm going to treat this is I'm going to look to, or do you know what do you think Meyer would say in this moment? How might Meyer
run off, like, potentially?
So it wouldn't run off, because there's no momentum. He's already strong and he's not pushing anymore.
Or
right? Does that make sense? If he was, yeah. So you can revert, or you could wrench, or you could reverse, depending on how either one of those names could apply to my interpretation of this action. Yeah. So yeah. So basically, you're bound. There's no pressure on your sword. If there was pressure, you could run off. That's fine. But there's no pressure. He's strong, and so what you have to do is reverse or wrench, or however you want to think about what you're pushing their sword out of the way by crossing your arms. Yeah. And then depending on the ensuing bind, there are several different type of follow-ups to that. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So here I just want to show you. I made a video of this as well. So this is sort of beginning from the weak position, right? So my opponent's sword is over top of mine. There's no momentum, so he's not pushing down on my sword. He's not pushing down on my sword, but also he is strong. So I can't retake a strike. I can't wind into this because he's bound on my middle, and I can't run off because he's not pushing my sword aside. And so in this case, I cross my arms, and then once my sword is aside, or once I've I've retaken a strong position. Now I have various ways that I can hit from here. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So in
You're
this
much
case, I
better
think,
positioned there.
yeah, exactly. So I'm looking for a cut to the head, a long edge cut to the head on the other side. But I do a few variations here of ways that we can move from the wrenching. So that's the same action. That's and I go
Yeah,
long edge
that's
cut
the
once,
other. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Right. So it's just depending on what the pressure signal he gives after the wrenching is, right? Um, is his configuration such that I can get my strong in front of his weak again? In which case I'll treat it more of a spectrunster or a winding kind of a bind, or is he withdrawing his sword? Or as in this case, uh, if he recognizes the threat and withdraws, then I'm not going to put necessarily chase in that moment, right? So
Mhm.
just looking again, right? I'm just clearing the bind. Meyer has a great thing that he says. I'll mention after we look at this one more time. But I'm here. My blade is under his. I wrench or reverse, and then my momentum isn't fast enough, and so he withdraws before, and then I'm just going to withdraw myself. I've done what I needed to do to save myself from the threat of his sword being on top of mine. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah.
I won. Good. Yeah. So, um, so it's cool actually. Meyer says in the handwork section when he opens up the handwork section in the longsword, he says the Zufechten is where you endeavor to basically enter into the middle of the fight with advantage. Yeah, that's the way he categorizes the Zufechten. And then he says, but there are times once you're in measure that you could find yourself without advantage or underneath his sword. Right? Actually, you have Meyer. You have the Art of Combat with you, don't you?
Yeah.
Open it up. Let's see what he says. The handwork section in the longsword, where he talks about um, the phases of the fight. I want to hear exactly what he says. If that's all right.
Let's see. And you said that it is at chapter 5, handworks.
Yeah. Well, no. It's in the earlier chapter. It's in the phases of the fight, where he's breaking down the phases.
Times.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. So, what am I looking for? See
I think
the.
just where he gets to that, where he starts talking about the handwork. So he tells you what the Sufestion is, and how you're endeavored to enter um, into the fight with advantage,
Hmm.
and then he talks about the handworks and how basically he's saying there are times where you're underneath his sword. Do you see where it says that in there?
I'm not 100% sure.
I'd have to pull out my book. Let me see if I can. Of course, my I'll link it in the description, or
Mhm.
I'll post a text in the description of the video for you and anyone who's interested in what Meyer says. But I don't have my book handy, and I keep an inventory on my phone of like my favorite pieces of text. But of course, my phone
Yeah.
is my camera at the moment.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, he basically says like once if you find yourself in a weak position, right,
Hmm.
then typically you would want to withdraw, but there are methods by which you can do that safely. Right. And so this reversing would be an example of one method that you can do it safely, reversing or wrenching.
Okay.
Basically just pushing the sword out of the way, and then you have other options from there. So we got maybe a few more seconds of this exchange. Right here, again, you have
I don't think
an opportunity.
the video is. I'm not sure if the video is on the. I
Oh,
don't see
yep,
it.
you're right. You're right. Good
Sorry.
call. No, that's great. Thank you for reminding me. So we can see here, and you can see how you got here. Uh, so a reversing would have been exactly opportune in this moment. But of course, you move to wind, and he moves to wind. So you end up again. You get away with it. What should you do as this moment?
Cut to the hands, or like slice to the hands, or cut to the chin. I feel like.
Yeah, in fact, I would probably just cut to the chin in this case. There's very little. Like his hands are so extended, and his strong is so far away. He doesn't have a prayer of beating that cut to the chin.
Yeah.
So, uh, yeah, so that's good. Yeah, and you don't, and so yeah, you end up with that short edge cut, and so again, that's no big deal. You're in an exchange. You've been fencing for a little while by this point, so your wherewithal is uh, probably diminished. But certainly, like there's no thrust or cut. His strong is already in the way, so there's no action that we can do to hit the head from that angle.
Yeah, he moves down. We could try that.
Yeah.
And then I tried to thrust to the face again, but I'm too far.
Yeah. So I think that's basically it. So I want to show. I have one more piece of video we were talking about earlier. We were talking about just if they bind on the middle, right? So if we move to wind early, so I think what happens in your case, you wind to retake, right? So so what's happening here is it looked like, and I have to find the timestamp in your video, but it looked like basically what happened was you were attempting to strengthen with your short edge, yeah? So you're strengthening with your short edge to the outside, and then he zookens in response, right? And so the sequence looks something like this, where I'm strengthening with my short edge to the outside, he zookens in response, and then I wind here, right? And then he winds. Do we see that?
Yeah.
And then he's able to get his strong in front of the weak, but then I work into this action and cut around to the other side. So that's fine, whatever. But that's the way it plays out in your video, and I can't remember the timestamp exactly. We can find it again later. But watch again. He basically he retakes. I wind in response to his retaking, and then he lifts his hilt and gives me the opening. Yeah. But what if he, instead of doing that, what if he binds heavy on my middle? Yeah. So let's see what happens if everything else is the same, but his response is not to target my strong. His response is to target my middle. Okay. So I bind on with the short edge, he zookens to retake, and then I wind, and then he binds on my middle. And you can see what happens there. All right? Watch that one more time. He zookens, I wind, he binds in the middle, and now I'm mutated. Okay?
Yeah.
So just to talk about how to retake against that action, right? So basically what happens, you're binding this way with your short edge, he zookens, and then you're trying to regain a strong position on the other side, yeah? Instead of lifting my hilt like this, I'm just going to shift. I'm just going to rotate the direction that I'm oriented. And this is what it looks like. So everything is the same here. The same setup. I'm binding on with my short edge. So I'm binding on with my short edge. My opponent zookins to retake, and then I remain in Spec Fenster. Do you see how I did that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then we can speed it up so that it's happening a little bit faster. That was an exaggerated version of what I'm looking for, but this is the way it would look like in practice. Okay, let's speed it up to normal speed. All right, does that make sense?
I think so.
So the idea is that when his sword comes around, let's close this. When his sword comes around, so I'm here. I've taken on this side. His sword comes around. I just bring my strong to my center and point towards his sword.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So again, I'm here. My strong is on my center. I'm pointed towards the sword. His sword comes around. Strong is on my center, pointed towards his sword, and then I'm just extending from my thrust. As opposed to strong is on my center, pointing towards his sword, and then he cuts around. My strong is high. My point is towards him, and then he binds heavy on my sword and opens up for the new chair. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, I mean, it's things tended to work out. There's lots of amazingly good stuff there, and I just again I can't stress enough the pacing is just exquisite because it actually gives you an opportunity to isolate these moments.
Mm-hmm.
Several times you have beautiful openings to strike, and you were able to make the decision in time and work Indes beautifully. Um, and it's just not something that you can see if the actions are happening too fast. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any more thoughts or questions before we wrap this up?
Nope. Not really. There's already a lot to think about, and sounded very very productive, very interesting. Uh, yeah. I think the main reason why we don't like to do it too fast is like we're not trying to outrun each other, and this is the
Right.
what is so great fencing Jordan, fencing Matt, anybody here is like we do try to like focus not so much on winning
Hmm.
purely. It's like
Yeah.
we.
Well, so yeah, I mean, there's a difference between performing the action uh, faster than your opponent,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like win it. There are two ways that you can win, right? You can like you can you can out uh, you can outperform them athletically, by just
Yeah.
moving more powerfully or faster, or I mean and you can win a lot of matches that way, and you can stack the advantage, becoming very strong in those dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we don't just play that kind of game, right? So sometimes we play like I don't know. I'm going to date myself here. Sometimes we play Age of Empires, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is like a real time game where both players are moving as fast as they can. And then other times we play Heroes of Might and Magic, which is a turn-based game, right? And it's okay to pick the right to try and pick the right move as opposed to try and do whatever move faster or stronger or more powerfully. You know,
Yeah.
um, no, I guess the ideal in all of our practice should be maybe to be maximized in all of the various dimensions, right? So like
Yeah.
we pick the right move and do it
Mm-hmm.
beautifully and explosively and fast and all of the other things. But we
Mm-hmm.
you know we can train all of these things separately. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Milos, and
Yes.
I appreciate your time and appreciate your beautiful fencing that we got to take a look at.
Thank
And
you. I appreciate you and you taking your time to. I'm sure you're busy, and I really do appreciate just going through everything. It does help a lot.
yeah, you got it. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you later.